When life gets difficult, when you're under loads of pressure at work, or stressed about your studies, or dealing with family stuff, or health issues, or money problems, whatever it might be, what does getting through it actually look like for you? Now, I'm not talking about the polished version, the version that people post online, but the real version. That's what I want to talk about in today's podcast. I'm Jo, and welcome back to my English learning podcast. This is where I talk to you in a natural way, much like I would a friend, and give you some real life British English listening practice along the way. This month, the theme across all my platforms, YouTube, Instagram, on my website and Substack, is the theme of resilience. And I wanted to do a podcast episode about it because I think it's one of those words that people use all the time. I'm not sure we always stop and think about what resilience actually means in real life. And I want to talk about that a bit today. What it means to me, what resilience looks like in language learning, which I think is relevant to a lot of you who are watching. And I'm going to mention 2 books that connect to this theme in very different ways. Plus, if you watch to the end, I've got an English speaking prompt to try and encourage you to speak about resilience in your own words. If you're new here, hello, it's lovely to have you. And if you've watched before, thank you. I'm really glad you're here. Now, this transcript for today's episode, along with notes, will be available on my Substack. I'm kind of moving quite a lot of my content over there at the moment. You can find a link in the description below. So, resilience. It's one of those words that gets thrown around a lot. And I think when people think of resilience, one phrase that often springs to mind is to bounce back. To bounce back after something difficult happens. To bounce back after a setback. And yeah, but bouncing back is a useful phrase. It's common, people say it all the time. And obviously it has its place, but I've never really loved it. It sounds a bit too easy, a bit too quick, a bit too tidy. I think bouncing back gives the impression that when something bad happens, you go through a difficult time and then you immediately spring back into shape again. Everything goes back to normal. And for a lot of people, that's not actually how it feels. I think real resilience is a lot more messy than that. Sometimes it's not bouncing back at all. Sometimes it's just getting through the week. Sometimes it's getting out of bed and doing what needs to be done. Sometimes resilience is about having a wobble, feeling lost, losing your footing for a bit, and then gradually getting it back, very slowly. That feels a lot more real to me. So when I talk about resilience, that's more what I mean. Not some glossy, impressive version of coping, but more the version where you just keep going, even if you're doing it really badly or really slowly. Because I think that still counts. And I think it counts for a lot. And going on to language learning, I think this idea is really important in language learning. Because learning a language, especially as an adult, takes a lot of resilience, especially when you're no longer a beginner, because that stage can be surprisingly hard in its own way. People often focus on the practical side of language learning, the grammar, the vocabulary, the pronunciation, finding time to study, staying consistent, all of that stuff. And yes, of course, that matters. It's really important. But I think also the emotional side of language learning also matters. Maybe more. That feeling where you know what you want to say, but you just can't find the words. That awkward moment when somebody says something to you and you have to ask them to repeat it because you didn't understand. And then maybe you have to ask them to repeat it again. The horrible habit of comparing yourself to somebody who seems to speak the language so much more fluently than you. And then there's losing momentum, which I think is a big one. I know this one personally from starting to learn Mandarin. There was a stretch where I was doing really well. I was practicing every day. I felt focused. I feel myself making progress. And then life just sort of happened. It got in the way. And then I lost the rhythm and I stopped doing it regularly. And then when I tried to come back to it, I had this horrible feeling where I thought, oh my God, I've forgotten every single word. I've forgotten everything that I learned. And I think a lot of language learners will be familiar with this kind of feeling. You stop for a while and then the story in your head becomes, well, that's it. I've completely ruined my progress. I'm back to square one. But in my experience, that's not usually true. Language learning isn't linear. You make progress, then you plateau for a bit. You feel confident for a while, and then you feel really clumsy. You stop for a bit, and then you come back. And then after a while, you realise it's all still there. It wobbles, it dips, it stalls, but then it starts again. That's normal. And I know I say it a lot, but I really do believe it. Mistakes are not proof that you're bad at English. They're not proof that you're failing, and they're all part of the process. They're information in a way, and they show you where the gaps are, what you need to work on. That's all. So if you've been feeling discouraged lately, if you've been being a bit hard on yourself, or comparing yourself to other people, or feeling like you should be further along by now, I just want to gently say that you are where you are, and that's absolutely fine. You do not need perfect English to be able to connect with people. You don't need flawless grammar to say something meaningful. You can probably already communicate a lot more than you give yourself credit for. And I think when it comes to resilience, we need to bear this in mind. We need to remember this. When we plateau, when we stop for a while, we're not going back to square one. We don't have to start from scratch all over again. We just need to get going again. We don't have to immediately bounce back and find, this idea of perfect English. We can just hop back on. We don't have to bounce back to some idea of a level of English. We just have to, get into the habit of keeping on doing it, regardless of all those things. And through this process, you're building confidence and you're building trust in your voice. And now's probably a good time to mention, if that's something you'd like to work on with me, then I do have one-to-one conversation sessions available. As usual, I'll put all the information in the description below. If you've got any questions, you can always send me an email. So let's move on to the books that I chose on this theme of resilience. The first one is a novel called Eleanor, Oliphant is Completely Fine. And this one I've got on my Kindle. I love the title of this one. It's so British. Somebody saying that everything is completely fine when it's clearly not. It's very, very British. It's by a writer called Gail Honeyman. And you may have heard of it. It was an international bestseller, I think. And the main character, Eleanor, is really memorable. She's intelligent. She's very literal in how she sees things. And she's quite socially awkward. And she's really isolated. And at times, she's dry in a really funny way, but also in quite a heartbreaking way. She lives a really rigid and solitary life. And as the novel goes on, you begin to understand why that is. I won't say too much because I don't want to spoil it for you, but I think it's a really interesting book when you think about resilience. Because it's not about being some big sort of triumphant version of strength. It's more about survival, loneliness, routine, pain, and the quiet effort that it takes sometimes just to keep functioning. And it's also a book about kindness. What happens when somebody is kind to you? What happens when somebody sees you a bit differently? So, yeah, I think it fits the theme really well. And from the point of view of language learning, it's also a good one. The English feels modern and natural, and there's plenty of British dry humour in it. So if you're looking for a novel that feels emotionally rich, but still really quite readable, then I think this is a great choice. The second book I wanted to mention is really quite a massive shift in tone. And I should say before I go on, it's not a light read. The English title of this book is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Frankl was a psychiatrist and a Holocaust survivor, and his book draws on his experiences in Nazi concentration camps, as well as the ideas that came out of those experiences. It was first published in 1946, and it was written in German, which is Frankl's native language. And I think it's been translated into 52 languages. And it sold millions and millions of copies worldwide. So there's a good chance you've come across it already. And there's a good version that there's a translation available in your language. It's one of those books that really stays with you. And at the heart of it is this idea that even when we can't control our circumstances, even when life is unimaginably hard, there is still something in how we respond. And that meaning matters deeply. The meaning can help people endure things that would otherwise feel completely intolerable and unbearable. And I find that idea really quite powerful. And it takes the conversation away a bit from the slightly shallow idea of resilience as being a kind of positivity or toughness or just pushing through. It takes it quite a lot deeper than that. And it's not about pretending you're fine. It's about dignity and endurance, meaning, and the inner life of a person who's under a huge amount of pressure. So, yeah, it's a completely different recommendation to Eleanor Oliphant, but it's a really remarkable book. And I do think it changes the way you think about resilience. So with all that in mind, I want to give you a speaking prompt. Not a journaling prompt, but a speaking one. If you feel like it, open the voice notes app on your phone and just talk for a few minutes. Don't script it, don't overthink it, don't worry about sounding polished. Just speak in English. And you know what? I think that's a kind of resilience in itself. Speaking English without knowing how it's going to come out. So here's the prompt, and I'll put it in the description as well. Think of a time when you kept going, even though something felt hard. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It can be something quiet, personal, or ordinary. What was happening and what kept you moving? What kept you going? And because I don't want to ask you to do something that I wouldn't do, I'll answer it too, albeit in my native language. So when I think about resilience in my own life, the first thing that comes to mind is losing my mum. She died of pancreatic cancer over 20 years ago. And what I remember about that time, it's all quite hazy, but I almost went into autopilot. I kept going because I had to. I didn't have any choice. She needed me. There were things that needed doing. Life couldn't just stop, even though something enormous was happening. So I just carried on. And I don't think I really processed it properly at the time. I was just functioning, just getting by. But looking back, retrospectively, I think that what it shows me is that you really don't know what you're capable of until life asks it of you. If you had, said to me when I was 25, in 7 years' time, your mum's going to get pancreatic cancer and die within 6 months, I would have just thought, well, that I wouldn't be able to manage with that. I wouldn't be able to cope. I can't deal with that. But then things happen and somehow you do cope. You do find a way to get through. And I think there's something really important in that, because we often assume that we're weaker than we actually are. We imagine that we completely fall apart. And maybe, we do. But even then, we keep on going in ways that we couldn't previously have imagined. So that would be my answer. Now, your response to this prompt could be entirely different. It could be about you're coping with problems at work or anything. The main thing is that you're speaking English. So we're coming to the end, but before I finish up, I'd really love to hear from you. What does resilience look like for you at the moment? Maybe it's something big or something small. Maybe it's going to work when you feel exhausted. Maybe it's starting English again after a break. Maybe it's speaking up when you feel nervous. Maybe it's getting through a difficult week. Whatever it is, Tell me in the comments. I love to hear from you. And if you'd like more support with this kind of real life English, then check out my Substack, where I'm focusing on this theme of resilience throughout April. And there's a PDF that you can download there with 30 days of written journaling prompts on this subject, plus lots of other materials. And again, I offer one-to-one conversation sessions if you'd like a calm, supportive space to practice your English in a more personal way. All the links are in the description. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this episode, then give me a like and subscribe to my channel. It really helps me out. And if you enjoyed this episode, you might enjoy some of my other podcast episodes. So I'll put the playlist up here. Take care of yourself, and I will see you next time. Lots of love. Bye.